Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming back for the fifth part of Houses for the Dead, the final part, too. Here we go. Thanks for listening. That night, his grandparents stayed up quite late. They watched Hawaii Five-O and Barnaby Jones. They popped popcorn on the stove, and his grandfather let Timothy pack his pipe with tobacco from a silver tin. And when the news started, his grandmother turned on the front porch light and turned off the overheads and went to put her nightgown on. His grandfather stayed in his chair and watched the news until the weather came on, and then he tapped his pipe into the dish and hung it up on his pipe rack and kissed Timothy on his head. He went in back, and Timothy heard them both gargling with Listerine, and then his grandfather dropped his teeth into the cup he kept on the bathroom vanity. His grandmother came out with a glass of water for him and kissed him and hugged him close. She smelled like rose soap. After she left, he waited until he was sure they were asleep and went into the kitchen and packed the knapsack with food and took a flashlight from the utility drawer and left before the man could show up. As he set the screen door in place, he took one last look at the house, at the ticking clock above the sideboard, the pitcher and basin directly beneath it, the cattails in the vase on the floor by the heat grate, the dim glow of the bathroom night light, and felt very strongly that he would not find his way back to his spot on the Davenport. Though he'd only visited his grandparents once a year or so, the feeling of what he would lose by leaving before the man arrived came strongly. The soft emptiness grew and grew, and by the time he'd stepped off the porch, he was already forgetting the details of the house that he had just recorded. He walked past the front walk, over the drainage ditch, and into the dense fog of High Street, the house disappearing from his memory in the same way his brother had, in the same way he would in the memories of those who once loved him. All the houses, all the faces, all the little things, of what good were they? How long would he remember the girl in the kerchief? How long would his father's girlfriend think of him? At lunch, on the day he met Tracy in the park with his father, he'd studied her face. When his father got up to use the restroom at the restaurant, Timothy stayed to be alone with Tracy. Tracy wasn't particularly pretty. She had a broad, flat face and a tiny, pointy nose. She smiled. Timothy did not dislike her. "You didn't get a chance to meet my brother," Timothy said, "but he's in a better place. His bed is still in my room, but no one sleeps there." Tracy reached across the table and put her hands over his. "Will you remember to keep his bed where it is?" Timothy asked. Tracy nodded, and Timothy decided she was being honest. Her eyes were big and damp, and her chin quivered. "I'm not a baby," Timothy said, "and I know he won't be coming back." He remembered this as he crossed over Wallace Street and into the Hill Cemetery. The gate creaked as he pushed it open. He swished his tennis shoes through the damp grass and touched the headstones, ran his palms over their curves and edges, disappointed that he couldn't conjure any bit of Benjamin, not a tuft of hair, or an eye color, or the shape of a foot. Nothing. Even his mother and father were hard to see. His grandparents, Tracy, his school friends. Maybe remembering doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Or maybe he can't remember them because he's the one who's moved on to a better place. Oh, how awful, he thought, that in the better place, stored underground, or in the mausoleums, dark and musty, that you can't remember those who loved you. When did it happen? And why did he bring a knapsack of food? And why didn't anyone show up to explain things? Seemed like a strange way to operate. And if the better place was so good, why was it so dark and lonely? He walked down the cemetery and shined his flashlight into the mausoleums. Inside, what appeared to be concrete benches lined the walls. At the end of each bench were the markers of who lived inside. The openings were all barred by large iron gates and fist-sized locks, but none looked as if they'd been opened in a long time. Why would someone make benches inside these houses if they weren't going to sit down and visit? He looked into each opening and then turned downtown. He walked down Main and past Clara's, and now the empty hairdryers sat cocked backwards like a row of waiting helmets. The magazine with the family and the lost shadow lie on the square table where he'd left it. He walked down past St. Paul's and its silent bells and toward the brightly lit newsstand full of people enjoying each other's company. Near the A&W sign, the girl with the kerchief still talked on the phone, and the man still leaned over and kissed her head. At the other end of town, the people still sat stunned, weeping into their hands in the house on the hill. The girl with the kerchief stood by the door. Timothy reached up and touched her arm, and she turned her head. "I'm sorry," he said. "My brother's gone too. I don't know where he lives anymore." The girl patted his hand, her fingers light as silk rippling over his knuckles. Outside from the front porch, Timothy watched all of Rosemont sleep. The houses with their slate shingles and the low, flat buildings downtown all silent, full of dreams. Just as he was ready to leave, Timothy saw his man coming up the driveway, leaning over as if he'd been walking fast. Timothy walked down the path to meet him. "I was wondering where you were," Timothy said. The man held out his arms. I know," Timothy said, "but I couldn't wait. There isn't much time." The man put his hands on his hips and seemed to be laughing. His mouth opened and puffs of air escaped. "I didn't forget about you, though," Timothy said. "I brought your food with me." The man leaned back, his mouth wide, his face squeezed so tight that little cracks appeared in his skin. Through the cracks, Timothy could see light glittering in another town, the curve of the earth bright with the dawn, a rise of hills still deep in darkness. When the man stopped laughing, Timothy handed him the knapsack, and the man looked inside. He reached in and pulled out a stack of old photos from his grandmother's suitcase. "How'd those get in there?" Timothy said. "I put in rolls and cheese and bologna." The man reached in again and pulled out a batch of postcards and letters tied together, and then several pipes and bundles of pipe cleaners, and a pouch of tobacco, and a box of polished stones, and a marten feather. "I'll be," Timothy said. "That certainly doesn't seem right." Finally, the man took out a tin from the pack and opened it. The aroma of his grandmother's molasses sugar cookies surged from within. The man made no sound, but if he could have, Timothy thought, it would have sounded like "ooh" or "mmm." "I know," Timothy said. "They're good, right?" They sat down together at the top of the hill, where Benjamin never got to sled, and ate the cookies. For once, the man ate slowly, and while he chewed, he seemed to grow more solid, less filthy, and younger. Each bite brought him further and further back into Timothy's world, until he was just an older boy, eyes twinkling, as he licked each finger clean. His clothes were patched and ill-fitting, but they were clean, and his fingernails cut square, and hands unscarred and broad and strong. He looked at Timothy and smiled. "Thank you," he said. Only when he spoke did Timothy recognize him. It was the same boy as inside. He looked up to the house and back to the boy. The boy nodded. He looked into the tin, only to find it empty. He smiled one last time, and Timothy said, "Wait!" But it was too late. And the boy again became the dusty, lonesome figure in baggy clothes. Timothy picked up his knapsack, and the man held out his hand. Timothy took it, and together they walked home. When Timothy's mother came to pick him up, she was driving a new car. They shared a long hug, his mother crying, her face pressed into his neck and shoulder. She said that they'd be staying the night, and Timothy said, "That's fine, but don't think you're getting the Davenport. That's where I sleep in this house." Later, he heard the grown-ups talking. Their voices came drifting from the kitchen, which seemed as far away as Mars. He turned the TV sound down low and listened. "Oh, he's such a good, sweet boy," his grandmother said. "We've been so worried," his mother said. Of course, that's understandable," his grandmother said. "He's been through so much." His grandfather tapped the bowl of his pipe on the table and said, "Doug could have picked a better time to have a midlife crisis." His mother said, "There wouldn't have been a good time." His grandmother said, "You can see he misses Benny something awful. He's just so quiet. I don't think he said 10 words the whole time he was here. He's almost like a ghost." There followed another long silence, and chills raced through Timothy's body. His grandmother cleared her throat and said, "But he's going to be okay. He's so attentive to everything around him. He spent hours going through those old photos and studying the ones of Daniel, the school pictures from right before he was taken from us. I've never seen a boy spend so much time sitting still. And," she continued, "he may be quiet and withdrawn now, but if his appetite is any indication, then he'll be right as rain. I've never seen a single boy eat so much." Thanks. Houses of the Dead. New story next week. Bye. Merry Christmas.